And if I can then welcome on the panel, we are joined here by Steve Smart, in order. He's the Senior VP for Space at CGI UK and Chair of the industry body UK Space, followed by Paul Kahn, President of the Airbus Group UK, which of course is the home of Bridget, and he's had a hand in some of the most exciting space missions in recent years. Stuart Martin, CEO and Executive Director of the Satellite Applications Catapult, set up to exploit the business opportunities in space. And finally, Anu Ojha, Director of the National Space Academy, which inspires young people to follow STEM careers. The panel. Catherine, I want to start with you. I mean, you've been talking there about the UK space being much more about Tim Peake and human spaceflight. Do you think the public really gets it? Do they understand how busy we are in low Earth orbit?
I think we do hide our light under a bushel a little bit. I mean, I have to say that as of last year, I didn't know we had a space agency. I met the previous chief executive over drinks one night and went home and said to my husband, you know, I met the man with the most interesting job in government. Did you know we had a space agency? And he said no. Now, that was last summer. Of course, in December, 30 million people watched Tim Peake's launch to the International Space Station, and over 1 million school children have been involved in experiments linked to the space station in their schools, and that whole education program continues. So I think people may have a slight misconception that what we do in space is all about human spaceflight and the International Space Station, but that's a good starting point for awareness raising. Now what we need to do is to get the rest of the story out there about the exciting science programs and the innovation that we lead.
But Tim Peake is a great hook, isn't he? That he's getting people talking about space, and perhaps in a way we didn't do with Helen Sharman when she went up 25 years ago. Here's an opportunity to really get people involved and show just how much we are doing in space.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a great ambassador. He's a great ambassador.
Anu Ojha, you of course deal with young people. He's gold for you, isn't he?
You're right there, Thomas, but we need to remember that, yes, space inspires. Inspiration on its own is not enough. The Prime Minister made very clear the role of aspiration. There are vast swathes of communities in the United Kingdom who feel disengaged. Once you have got people inspired, once you have them aspiring to career paths, not just in the space sector, but in science and technology generally, you then have to support them in their skills development. So what the National Space Academy does is it works to use those inspirational contexts from space that we know resonate with everybody to boost students' curriculum attainment, teacher effectiveness and careers awareness, because having a future workforce literate in the language of science and technology, with qualifications in science and technology, they're the most valuable educational currency that you can have, and future prosperity absolutely depends on it.
And just let's underline how big that workforce is going to be. If the strategy, the growth strategy goes as planned, we're going to need 100,000 people working in the sector by 2030.
We've got a very ambitious target that is achievable, but in some cases, and I know Stuart's going to be talking about this later, they're going to be in industries, and we heard this talked about this morning, that we don't even know exist yet, because as Catherine said, satellite applications are completely infused into the fabric of our 21st century way of life. So, you know, it's not just blue sky. We've got very, very ambitious targets to get to, but we think we can.
Stuart, this is really the opportunity for you then to take those bright minds and turn them into good businesses, aren't you? Just explain what the Satellite Catapult is all about and how you actually turn that into something that the UK can celebrate.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. So, like all catapults, we are operating at the interface between the research community and the business community, and trying to get that turnaround and that efficiency of translation of research into functional business activity, and also getting the demand coming back from commerce as to what it wants from the research world. And as part of what we do, we work with the universities who are producing the students, producing the future workforce, helping them find internships, helping them find roles in industry, and we have a fantastic conversion rate from that. And also helping them, those that have the aspiration and those that have the drive, understand what it takes to be an entrepreneur, what it takes to launch a new business. And you know, when we were developing the Catapult concept 3.5 years ago, as it was now, and we were developing our plans for what the future would look like, we had to conceive of an environment where we had created all these new businesses. And in those days, we didn't know what those businesses were going to look like. We didn't know who they were going to be. So in our business plan, we made up a whole load of logos as to, these are the businesses we're going to support over the next 5 years, because there wasn't anybody there. But now, over the last 3.5 years, we've supported over 700 companies. We have 69 companies based at the Harwell site, which is where we're located, all of whom are looking at ways of exploiting space. And as Anu said, it's not just in the space sector itself. It's in retail, it's in finance, it's in health, it's in education. It's pretty much any sector you can think of, the space industry has a role to play.
Well, let's look back at the history first. I mean, why is it that the space sector is so strong? Why have we dominated telecommunications?
Well, it's a really interesting question, I think, and there's lots of reasons for it. I think one of the reasons for it, actually, bizarrely, is that in the 80s and 90s, we had a generation of engineers who'd been brought up on the Apollo missions, very inspired by space, but the UK was not participating in some of the big, high-profile, the launchers and the space station program in those days. So we had our space agency, or the forerunner of our space agency, was called the British National Space Centre, was a member of ESA, and we used that membership to foster sort of commercially viable applications. So we spend a lot of time focusing on the telecom sector. And that's why now we have one of the world's leading industrial groups in telecoms, commercial satellite telecoms here in the UK, and also through programs like Skynet 5, working with the military, which is genuinely world-beating in terms of its capability.
Paul, at Airbus, you build an awful lot of satellites in your clean rooms. It must be great to see that now beginning to, spread out around the solar system. I'm not quite sure many businesses can say that.
Well, we do. Well, we provide 25% of the world's telecom satellites, so starting their life in the UK. So that is a very, very strong position, and it comes from the wealth of skills and expertise and support from the government, from academia, by working in partnership. And we've really seen that happen in the space sector.
And just to talk about Galileo, because this is a really exciting Europe's GPS navigation system, which is 4 more satellites went up last week, bringing it to 18 now, a constellation of 18?
That's right. Well, we launched four further Galileo satellites last week, which to launch 4 in one go was an achievement in itself. And they're coming down in size. I mean, that's one of the areas where we're really a world-leading player in small satellites here in the UK. And that's, again, working in partnership between university and industry. And that's the result, is a really world-class product.
Steve, you deal with a lot of the smaller companies working within the sector. Hardware, of course, is a big part of that, but it's much, much more, isn't it? There's quite a breadth to the UK space industry.
Yes, very much so. And we talk about space-enabled capabilities. I think in response to the earlier question about telecommunications, it's very much driven by demand, a demand for global communications that existed in the late 70s and 80s. Of course, now with GPS, there's a demand there for precision navigation. And of course, who would use precision navigation? It's all around transportation. So it's transportation in a maritime setting, transportation in an aero setting, and transportation on land. So that leads us to systems that we deal with a lot, which are intelligent transportation systems, systems that can vastly improve the way in which we use those infrastructure programs. There's some really interesting facts and figures around that. I mean, every day there's something like 33,000 aircraft that cross the European skies. To make an improvement in the way that they operate, you need precision navigation, you need global navigation systems as well, and global communication systems. You also need regulation and certification that works across that. So there's a lot of what we call the upstream involved in this process, but there's also a lot of downstream, new business models to create those intelligent transport systems and safety systems.
So people often think about hardware, don't they, when they think space, but nowadays it's much more than that. It's about data, and we've got Earth observation satellites orbiting, taking pictures, and you can, tell us, the people that you represent, what kind of stuff are they doing with all that data that's coming down?
Well, again, they're reacting to demand. If you take industrial output, something like 30% of global industrial output is influenced by the weather. That's 30% of industrial output is influenced by the weather. So our ability to predict and make an assessment as to what the weather is actually going to do for a particular industry, that ability to take that big data, huge amounts of data, run various models, collaborate across different businesses, that ability to predict will make a difference potentially to 30% of the industrial output on a global basis. So we have people involved with observation at the level of Earth, observation in terms of the atmosphere, prediction, so climate change, security, all of those issues will not be solved from space, but will be much better informed through the acquisition of that data.
And Catherine, there are huge opportunities there for people working within the industry, aren't there?
There are, and you know, the market research reports predict that about 80% of the growth and value of the global space market is going to come from new applications and services from satellite data. We've funded with Satellite Applications Catapult a new portal, and now it's going to crash, of course, today, Stuart, because
Bring it on.
Fine. Where anybody can register and access Copernicus system Sentinel data. And
just explain what those are.
Okay, so the Copernicus system is an Earth observation system. That's an EU system that we've contributed to quite heavily in the UK, and they are sending back, they've launched a number of satellites called Sentinel satellites. They're sending back Earth observation data, and we're allowing people to access that through that SADAS portal just to stimulate people coming up with new applications. In the public sector, you know, if you think about the local authority being able to monitor land use, but also, you know, solving some very big policy challenges for the world, like food security and better use of resources and managing floodplains and fire hazards and emergency response, which is obviously not Earth observation data, but that use of data to solve public policy problems and also create just new applications that are commercial applications is a huge potential and will create employment in this country.
And Stuart, you must see some of those ideas coming through.
Well, absolutely, we do. And the same issues that are, you know, at one level, they're public policy issues, at another level, they're business risks for future viability of existing business models. And you know, so we're working with organisations like Sainsburys, who are probably not the first company to come to mind when you're thinking about space technology. You know, they are, you know, their customers are telling them that they really care about where their food comes from. We heard about it on this morning's panel from the burger providers, that, you know, food provenance is a really big issue, and you know, 1 in 5 of the fish caught globally is caught illegally, and the whole global fishing industry is an absolutely vile trade. Associated with slave labor and, you know, all those sorts of things. So they need to be sure that the fish they are buying are not tainted by any of the, you know, any of those particular aspects of the trade. And you can use satellites to provide that security. And also, you know, on things like organic produce. There's a statistic, I understand, that, you know, the total volume of land under organic production at the moment is going down, yet somehow the amount of food being produced is going up. So there's a risk in that system, and we can use satellites to gain assurance that there's no evidence of the, you know, the very intensive processes going on in the areas which are, as, you know, being claimed as being organic farms.
And do you think young people realise that space isn't necessarily about the inky blackness, that there are huge opportunities there? They might not have to have an interest in what Tim Peake has been up to, but you can still take what we're learning from space and apply it to stuff down here on the ground.
I think they're interested, but I'm always asked, you know, Anu, what do you mean by space science? And I will say, look, there's 3 categories, and this is very personal. There's, first of all, there's looking out there. That's traditional astronomy, and it can be telescopes on the ground or telescopes like Hubble that have transformed our understanding of the universe. Then you've got going out there, so that's our robotic and human exploration. And in my lifetime, we have sent robotic spacecraft throughout the solar system, and it has transformed our understanding of worlds that were tiny points of light in the most powerful telescopes when I was a child. But the really important part that's overlooked is what we're talking about, which is the satellites that are looking back here at planet Earth. They have rewritten the textbooks about the influence of human activity on the environment. They are saving hundreds of thousands of lives every year just because of storm forecasts, and critically, they are generating, I mean, we talked about the UK figures of £12 billion per annum. Globally, it's £250 billion per annum, and it is growing. And it is driven primarily by our demands as a society. We want telecommunications. We want uses of data for our personal lives that we wouldn't have dreamed possible even 10 years ago, the Uber, the other type of apps, etc. Now, as soon as young people start to see that, yes, exploration is the trope that draws them in, but they start to see, again, it's not just skills in physics and mathematics. I'm biased, I'm a physicist. However, they start to see life sciences, chemistry, engineering. We talked about the role of a legislative framework. We were talking about STEAM this morning. They start to see there is an element of space for them, but ultimately, even if there's not, they've developed those skills that they can translate into a myriad of different parts of the sector, and that's how they're going to contribute to future prosperity.
Stuart, how's the sector changing then? I mean, you've got smaller and smaller satellites being built. I mean, they used to be the size of a car, didn't they? But now you'll be able to, with miniaturization, you can pack them into what they call CubeSats. I mean, they're like literally 10 centimeters in every dimension. That vastly brings down the cost of launch. You can do so many more things with it.
Well, there's two things that the miniaturization of technology allows you to do. One is that it allows you to build these smaller satellites, but it also enables you to do much more with the larger satellites. So that industry is still going strong, and it's very healthy and offering more and more capability. But I think that you're right. I think the really exciting part is the smaller satellites, because what that enables you to do is launch many more satellites for the same cost, or even still at a much reduced cost, which means that you can have satellites moving over the same place more frequently, and you get much better what is called temporal resolution. So you get the same image over and over again from the same place. So you can spot change over much shorter timescales. And that's what's driving a lot more of the data analytics and the machine learning algorithms now that are coming in, pouring over all this data and trying to extract what knowledge can be gleaned from this, which has value in the marketplace.
So, Simon, how's that changing things then? I mean, how disruptive is that ability to launch things up much lower cost, do much more with it?
At the end of the day, it's being agile. It's being agile to react to changing circumstances. For me, the innovator is the individual that can take the science, the technology, the engineering, and the mathematics and put a business wrapper around that, potentially applying that to a completely different sector. Having those assets, being able to control those assets, I must confess, I think that satellites were the first unmanned vehicles. That was nearly 50 years ago. So having those robotic capabilities, having those general capabilities, but having the agility with smaller satellites to be able to react to a changing business model.
And how are things changing for you then, Paul?
Well, it is very much enabling those different business models. So, you've got large satellites, small satellites, you can mix them in different ways. OneWeb, which is something that we're investing in, the aim is to provide Wi-Fi everywhere, and that can absolutely transform an entire nation, an entire economy. When you get a different economy of scale and you provide that sort of online access to everyone. So it's a very fast-changing world, but it's also a world where up in space, you send your satellite up there, it has to stay there and work for the next 20 years. So it's a very high precision. We're operating at the very limit of technology. We're always trying to push those boundaries forward.
But are you expanding what you do from just being a satellite builder to looking at other technologies? I think you're involved in looking at some of the data that's coming down from Galileo and how you turn it into road pricing.
Well, we are. I mean, so you can go up and down the value chain, as Steve said earlier, upstream, downstream. We would do service business models. We would do the hardware itself. And it just opens up the range of what's possible. And space is also an enabler in technology terms, because what we're finding with Bridget here, the software architecture is used on a new lifeboat. The laser technology used for communicating between satellites is used for detecting defects in steel. So it's really pushing forward the boundaries of science, engineering and technology and applying that right across the economy.
Steve, the sector's no longer driven by national governments, is it? There's a lot of private involvement in this. How do you think that changes the complexion of the UK space industry if you compare it with, say, what's happening in America or France or Germany?
More innovation, I would say, more risk-taking. And obviously, a little bit more PR. You know, so we've seen it from SpaceX, we're seeing it from OneWeb, and so on. So a little bit more PR, a little bit more propensity to accept a degree of risk-taking, which has got to be a good thing. If we're going to innovate, we've got to take risks from time to time. Not something that governments would naturally be attuned to, again, for obvious reasons. It's public-funded money that need to be managed in a certain way. So I think that risk-taking, that innovation, that generation of new business models, we're seeing right across what I would call the service sector, to be able to introduce a new service, literally try it for a few weeks, months, see how that service runs, adapt and change it where it's appropriate to do that. And we're certainly seeing that in all three of the traditional domains of space, whether it's communication systems, navigation systems, or Earth observation and data processing. So a bit more experimentation leading to some very interesting business models.
And Catherine, at the agency, you welcome that private involvement. Quite a collaborative approach that we have here in the UK, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're almost unique outside of the US that all of our space sector is either publicly listed companies or privately owned companies. And we've worked, I think, since the inception of the agency in a very close partnership with the industry to try and identify what the big strategic opportunities are, and then to ensure that where government support is being provided, it unlocks economic growth opportunities. I think what's interesting about this, as I've mentioned in my remarks, about this advent of the new space models of small satellite constellations and things, is this challenge about, you know, what in my own layperson's mind I call space traffic management. You know, it's, I think, probably one of the most pressing policy questions for governments going forward is, you know, how can we unleash that opportunity for innovation in new services in commercial space, but also establish sufficient rules of engagement and regulatory oversight so that it isn't just a Wild West free-for-all. So it's, you know, one of the most pressing challenges, and we can really only do it through international collaboration because no one country controls, you know, space as a domain. So.
We've had a lot of focus on Europe in recent years with the European Space Agency, but just tell us about the involvement with the Chinese and the Indians, and the space is global these days.
Space is global, and in a sense, actually, where collaboration in other areas might be a little bit complicated by, you know, other concerns. Collaboration in space, it seems often to be easier to do because it's science-led, because there's an opportunity to do things that are about collaborating around education and future generations. And so you will see, quite surprisingly sometimes, you know, very close projects. You know, we are working, I say the European Space Agency, with Roscosmos on the launch.
The Russians.
You know, on the ExoMars program. And actually, you know, Tim Peake, you know, went up and came down in Soyuz capsule. And it's also, you know, very interesting opportunities to collaborate with nations all around the world, actually. So, you know, it's a very, very global business space.
I know you've been working in China, working with education, trying to make sure that there are the skills that are transferable.
Yeah, Thomas, there's a strategic partnership between the UK and China in space science, and we, the National Space Academy and University of Leicester, are leading the development of the skills and training regime. And I've had a team of 6 just recently come back from China. This is mainly at sort of high school level, training teachers and students, some university level work, and in fact some of my colleagues are upstairs now. And the Chinese were absolutely blown away at the levels of innovation that we brought into education by taking the very best of current space science, all of the areas, and coupling it with the very best of teaching. But I think their interest reflects a Chinese concern that they do not have innovation embedded within their systems. They need to have a fundamental reform. And where the UK is ahead, not just in education in the space sector, but in all of the aspects, is that we have world-class innovation that we've been doing in the space sector for 50 years. So my colleagues at the University of Leicester, they've been launching instruments into space since before I was born in 1968. And you will see that story reflected at all of the other powerhouses of space science and technology that we have in the United Kingdom. But once again, we need to tell the rest of the world about our capabilities.
We can't ignore Brexit. Stuart, how do you think that's going to affect the UK space industry?
Well, like everybody else, it's too early to say, I think, but there are some really key decisions that need to be, at least considered during the process around our involvement in programs like Copernicus and Galileo, as well as, the Horizon 2020.
Just to explain, because there's a lot of EU money in those programs, and the EU expects it to be an exclusive EU data set that comes down, and we would have to renegotiate the contract to buy ourselves back in.
Well, yeah, potentially. There's EU money that's gone into it, so that means there's UK money that's gone into it as part of our EU subscription to build the satellites that are up there now. And so there's an industrial component towards the building of those satellites that, it would be sad for us to lose since we've invested in building up that capacity. But also, as you say, getting access to the data and the communication systems that these satellites are providing, these are an asset that is of value to people working in the UK. They are available globally outside of Europe, but obviously if if the countries inside the EU have that privileged access, and that's something that we need to make sure that we maintain.
Paul, you work in 5 European countries, is that right?
I've been probably working all 28, I would
Right,
think.
okay.
Yes.
You have a big footprint in 5, don't you? How's Brexit going to affect Airbus?
Well, it's I certainly would say that life gets a little bit more complicated because we run a globally competitive business that makes use of the 4 freedoms of the EU every day of the week. So we're not looking for drastic change. The reality is, in the space sector, collaboration and working together across government, across borders, is fundamental, and that's focused on the European Space Agency. That includes Israel and Canada. So this isn't an EU matter per se. It's about continuing to work together, to collaborate, to work on joint research programs. What matters there more than anything is, if I'm blunt about it, British government funding. So I'm intrigued to know how much of the $2 billion that the Prime Minister promised this morning is going to end up in the space sector. I hope some of it. But that's Catherine's job. It's all our job because we're working together to attract that sort of investment. And this has a real impact, on what's going to happen post-Brexit, to high-value jobs that make a difference in Stevenage, Harwell, Portsmouth, Guildford.
Well, Catherine, Paul set you up there, really. How do you actually make sure that the space gets a slice of that money?
Well, unfortunately, it's a bidding process, and you have to have a very strong business case, as you know. So we hope, actually, that the sector can successfully pitch in to those innovation funds. We have some very strong, interesting propositions, to pitch in.
But you welcome the money?
Of course we welcome the money. That was an excellent announcement today. Anybody who works in government and the innovation sector, can only applaud that decision.
But the money makes a real difference. Bridget is here because the government decided to invest more in the ExoMars mission, and that meant the leadership of the Mars rover came to the UK. So it makes a big difference.
Steve, are your members nervous about Brexit? I think a third of the space workforce, is that right, is actually from abroad, that there's an awful lot of movement there already? Yeah,
pretty much so. As Paul pointed out, most of the members of the Trade Association, the larger organisations, they have operations right across Europe. My own organisation, CGI, has operations right across Europe. And it has been a tradition for 50 years for collaborative programs in space to involve the transfer of individuals, the movement of individuals, both across Europe but into other nations as well. And as we said earlier, the International Space Station is international. Large part of Tim's training was learning Russian. So it's an international business. Many of the applications that we talk about, they're applications that can be delivered globally to automotive, to air transportation, to agriculture. So an awful lot of what we do can be delivered to a global marketplace. It's very important that the UK retains its leadership in a number of those aspects.
Let's look to the future. Catherine, the spaceport is hugely exciting. There's another opportunity there. Just to explain what the spaceport is about, how that might actually lead to new opportunities.
Well, we talked about the growth of new business models of these small satellite constellation networks, and actually the difference about these new business models and technologies is that they are being designed, not to have a 15 and 20-year life cycle. They're being designed you know, like the insides of your mobile phone to be, you know, upgraded and refreshed on a regular basis. That is a very disruptive new idea, and what that is driving is a demand for much more frequent launches of satellites today. There are only 11 launching nations today, and even if you can, you know, design and build a CubeSat in a couple of months, you know, today what happens is you probably have to pay the same amount of money as it cost you to design and build that thing to hitch a ride on someone else's satellite launch, which may or may not put you in the orbit that you were, you know, optimized for. And you could wait up to, you know, a year, 18 months to find that space, you know, in the cargo bay. So what the government has proposed is to make the right conditions in the UK to enable small satellite launch to take place from a UK spaceport, but also to open the UK market to space flights, which, you know, there are other new, you know, entrepreneurs developing space flight propositions which are not the same old, you know, rocket launching up and launching satellites, but actually things that are either launching vertically from a spaceport or horizontally off the back of a plane and carrying fee-paying passengers and new,
I'll buy one.
low-cost microgravity experiments, you know, space and things like that for science, for the science community. So that price point of things going up into space is coming down, but actually the demand, you know, the key kind of cap on demand is that there just aren't very many places you can get a launch today, and that is one of the things that the UK government wants to bring to the UK, is to be, we have a great opportunity to be, you know, second only to the US really in establishing a light launch capability for the world.
And Steve, the huge opportunities there for your members then?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, the ability to be agile, to be able to act fairly quickly to new demand in a certain circumstance, whether it's comms or Earth observation, some great opportunities there. Yeah.
And Paul, Bridget, I mean, you've got quite an exciting few years ahead of you.
We have a very exciting, yeah, with Bridget, with the communication satellites we're working on, with small satellites, with Earth observation. There's just a lot going on, and it's an exciting sector to be part of.
And Stuart, what's the big thing that you see on the horizon?
I mean, there's so much coming up. I mean, following on from what you know, just talking about the spaceports, the one area of the space sector that hasn't seen much innovation since the space industry started is launching, and I think that's a real opportunity, and that's, you know, the sorts of new business models and operational models that go around with that. I think that they can really transform what we're doing. But there are also things like laser communications that are coming in that's going to dramatically increase the amount of volumes of data that can come down from space, and so that's going to, you know, have another order of magnitude in terms of the volumes that come through. So there's some, you know, lots of things happening.
And the air-breathing engine that's being developed in Oxfordshire, huge opportunity there. You get to Sydney in 3 hours, but for the space sector, you might be able to do launches much more cheaply. And that's the kind of innovation that we're getting here in the UK.
And that's what the spaceport's all about. It's about what can we do in the short term and what can we build as a platform for that, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of innovation that we can see coming down the pipe.
It's the future of travel and transport.
Anu, I mean, you're dealing a lot with young people, and the huge excitement there that you really want to capitalise on.
I think my final thoughts are this. You know, in my lifetime, the textbooks of physics and our understanding of the universe have been rewritten, and I'm only halfway through it. So we don't know how much there is to discover. But one thing I will say, very often people say we should just be concentrating upon the revenue generation business side of space. But we must keep our exploration and our fundamental research going. In the space sector, many of our people who are so skilled at space exploitation, they develop their fundamental skills through the exploration agenda. They were drawn to it by the exploration agenda. We cannot have future space exploitation without continued space exploration. And so when I saw that fundamental research budget that has been announced this morning, you know, this is absolutely key in terms of our blue skies research.
Wise words. I think we can agree that there are probably opportunities in space that perhaps you hadn't considered before. So please thank the panel.